All right, everybody. Now I just want to show you another example of an API. The Google Maps API is excellent. It really is because it's very easy to understand. It's very easy to follow. W3 Schools has a very straightforward tutorial taking you through every step of the way, which I strongly recommend all of you to attempt. And, of course, the Google documentation is actually amazing, predictably so. However, another example of an API with great documentation that is also worth trying is Giphy. And if you are unfamiliar with Giphy, Giphy is just a source, a library of GIFs, which people create and post and host all over the internet. Giphy has a number of APIs. They have APIs for just using their search query. They have APIs for pulling up a random GIF. They have APIs for trending GIFs. They have all kinds of APIs. Or rather, they have all kinds of API endpoints. Okay, so what we're going to do here is we're going to go through the process of trying to engage with the Giphy API as though we have never done so before. This is the process that you would want to go through whenever you try to use a company's API or a new API that you found. APIs are excellent. They open a lot of doors. They help stop you from having to reinvent the wheel every time. So you are going to want to rely on APIs more and more frequently as the scope of your projects get bigger and bigger. And in order to do so, there's frankly no easy way to teach it because every API is different. Learning how to use a given API is going to mean reading the documentation and trying it. There is no way around that. Okay, but Giphy is a good example of a very common pattern. So, first thing that I did is I looked for Giphy API docs. And the first thing that came up was this link, Getting Started with the Giphy API. And this is all documentation related to the Giphy API, including the many different endpoints they have here. And we're going to use the search one, the big one, the main one, the primary one. Okay? And there's a lot of great information here that's worth reading. Firstly, they do require an API key, so I did have to create an account with Giphy. It's free, took 2 seconds, and once I did that, I was able to create an app within the Giphy system, register it, and I have an API key right here. I called my app API module, just for you guys. All right, so I did that, took about 3 seconds. I got a key which I can now use. And it's definitely worth reading all of this documentation when you are trying to engage with a new API. But we're going to do the short version here, which is going to mean coming down to the code examples and looking for the code example which is appropriate for us. Obviously, it's not curl, it's not Python, it's not Ruby, it's not PHP. It's going to be this JavaScript one. Okay? This code sample is JavaScript. So I'm just going to copy this and actually paste it into my project's main.js file. And first thing I'm going to do for my own sake is I'm going to clean it up a little bit. Yeah, that'll do. Okay. Now, you should notice we've got a $sign here. So what does that mean we're using? It means we're using jQuery. Okay, $.get. $.get. What this is really just a shorthand for what you've already learned, which is the $.AJAX, which includes a method of type get or type post. .get is a shorthand for this with a method type get. Okay, so it's just a little faster. On the other hand, there is also .post for the same thing. It is a shorthand for .ajax with a method type post. Post and get are a little bit different. They have their differences, but they are both involved in communicating with APIs, and they are the two AJAX methods you are likely to run into most. If you're interested in learning about the difference, it's very easy to find lots of information on it. It's not within the scope of this video to go into post. I just want you to be aware that you will see it. There are distinctions, and you should make yourself aware of them. We are going to use get. Okay, that's going to be our primary method. So let's break down the code that we just copied over. Here we go. We have some kind of URL here, which I assume is our API endpoint. And this is the URL to which we are making an AJAX request, a get type AJAX request. Okay, and what we're doing with this request, which is going to return an object, is we're storing it in this XHR variable. XHR. Now this was a variable name copied over from the example code. I'm going to change this to my request. I'm going to change it here too. Alright, so we're making the request of this URL, but you want to pay attention to a certain thing here. This URL, and this is something you did run into with the Google Maps and will probably run into in the future, it contains a portion which says in all caps, your API key. Okay, now what we are supposed to do is actually replace this section of the URL with our own custom API key. Now, as I said, I registered with Giphy. I created an account, registered an app, and I got an API key right here. So I'm going to copy my API key. I'm going to paste it in place of your API key and save. Okay, and now we're at a point where we could test this because the second part of the code that we requested, what this actually does is it exercises the .done method on the myRequest object, which again is our request to the Giphy API endpoint. What .done means is once the request is finished. Okay, once the request is finished. This is a method which does something when the request is done. It's pretty self-explanatory. And what does it do? Well, that is what is made explicit in the function which it takes as an argument. Okay, so myRequest.done function do stuff when done. That's what we're dealing with here. What you may have seen in the other videos is .success, which is valid. This is if the request is successful specifically, or .failure, .error. There are a number of different methods. .done is kind of a catch-all. No matter how it returns, whether it's a success or a failure, do this when it's done. Okay? And what does it do? It takes an argument of data, which is going to be understood by this method as the data object returned to us from this URL, and it console logs it with a little success.data message. That's it. Okay, so once again, we make a request to an API endpoint, and when that request is complete, we console log the data. So let's test this out. I'm going to reload my page, open my console, and there's our message, success.data, with an object next to it. Let's expand that object. It looks meaningless. It looks really difficult to parse, but in reality it's not. Okay, this object is very, very typical of what you will receive from an API request. And all it is a massive object. Being an object, it means it's very, very easy to parse out. Okay, so this is our object. If I open it up, this object has a data property, a meta property, pagination property. I don't want to deal with the pagination property. It's just, I don't need it. I don't want to deal with the meta property. I'm going to see what's in data. Well, the data property has an array, 5-item array of 5 objects. And each of these objects has a bunch of properties of its own, but they're all GIFs. Each one of these is an individual GIF. Okay, so now what we might want to do is actually utilize this data in some way. We've made the request. We've successfully retrieved data. Now we want to use it. So let's say rather than just console log, we actually want to, let me get rid of this, we actually want to print all of these GIFs onto my document. Well, how do we do that? Well, let's just try it with one first. I'm going to create an image element. And I'm going to append it to my body. And I'm going to insert something into the source of new image. I don't know what that something is, but I know it's going to come from one of these objects. So how do I get here? Well, we have the data object, which is the object itself. This is our data object. And where do I want to go inside that data object? I want to go inside the data property of that data object. So data.data. And where do I want to go inside of that data property? Let's just try the first one, the first object. So at the 0 index. And what do I need to pull from the object at the 0 index? There's a lot here. There's a lot, and it can absolutely be difficult to parse. You may want to test out these URLs and see, are any of these the actual GIF? Nope, this is... yeah, we're doing a search for Ryan Gosling. Okay. Anyway, this is not the GIF itself. This is actually a page on which the GIF is embedded. So that's not really useful to us. We could try it though. Let me try it with, here, just the URL property. Let's see. Data.data at the 0 index dot URL. Okay, we've got our image element here, but it's not showing anything. Okay, so obviously that source, it was inserted correctly, but that is not the correct source. That's not what we need. So let's go back to our data. You might want to test all of these URLs, but I know for a fact that none of these are what we want. What we want is actually in this images property. Okay, so I'm going to add after the 0 index dot images, and that takes us inside this big old object. And this images object has all of these properties: original MP4, original still, preview GIF, preview WebP, I'm not sure what that is, preview fixed width, preview downsized. These are all different variations of the original GIF, which we could use based on our purposes. If I want the originally sized GIF, dot original. If I want one which loops infinitely, dot looping. Oh, this is an MP4. I don't want an MP4 on my page. If I wanted one that's downsized, downsize small, or any of the other downsized. If I just wanted a still image, original still, or maybe just preview, All of these are different formats, different iterations of the original GIF. Okay, so let's say I want to go with original, dot original. Data at the 0 index, dot images, dot original. And is that going to do it? No, because original is actually an object itself. What do I need inside of original? I need the URL. This, see, it ends with .gif. This is the actual GIF file. And if I wanted the MP4, I could access it. I haven't seen a WebP file used. Anyway, images.original.url. Let's see. And there we go. We've got Ryan Gosling on our website. Something which is never a bad thing. Okay? So what we did is we dove into our console, really, and just examined the data object that was being returned. And we found what we needed. We figured out how to parse it. And it was really easy. With dot notation, it's not that hard. It might have taken some trial and error. It might take you guys a little longer, but this is not difficult. This part is not difficult. You just don't let yourself get confused by all the stuff. There is a lot of stuff, but you know what you're looking for. It's in there, and it's not that hard to find if you look for it. Okay, so we made our request. And when our request was done, we parsed the data and printed the very first URL, the very first GIF that returned to us on my document. Let's do it for all 5 now. Okay, I can see there are 5 objects in the data array. And point of fact, that's coming from the very end of this URL, limit 5. But let's do this for all 5. How are we going to do that? Well, I know that I'm going to want to wrap this in some kind of for loop. And what are going to be the arguments in my loop? Well, what in here could be replaced with I? Obviously, it's that index. Okay? So what's going to be the length? What's going to be the array that determines how many times the loop runs? Data.data. So as long as I is less than data.data.length, it's still just a number. I++. I'm going to replace that 0 with I. Save. And we have 5 Ryan Gosling GIFs on our page. Okay? Not too bad. But that's how we did it. We didn't have to independently source these GIFs. We didn't have to look for the 5 most popular Ryan Gosling GIFs on Giphy and then separately store the source for each inside an array or anything like that. We used one request to the Giphy API and we got 5 GIFs. What happens if I change this limit 5 to limit 15? Well, we have 15 Ryan Gosling GIFs. Oh, this is funny. Okay. So, that part is hopefully fairly straightforward for you. Okay? $.get is just a jQuery AJAX function, built-in function, to make a request from a third-party server. .done tells the browser what we're going to do when that request is finished. You could take this pattern and apply it to a number of different APIs. I'm even going to get rid of the console log and apply this to a number of different APIs and they will work. But let's take it a step further. What if we want our user to be able to determine what we're searching for or how many GIFs we're going to display? Well, what do we need for that? Let's start with, I'll just use an input. We'll keep it simple for the sake of the video. An input with an ID of number. And above that input will be a paragraph that says how many GIFs do you want to see? And next to the input will be a button. Get GIFs. Okay, so first things first, when a user clicks on that button, I want something to happen. So I'm going to add an event listener. Add event listener click function. What are we going to do when a user clicks the button? Well, we're going to do all this. Actually, if we're already using jQuery, I'm just going to use jQuery here. Okay, so when you click the button, we make our request. Let's just try it as is. Oh, I didn't save. There we go. So I click the button and the GIFs appear. We're not using our input yet, though. I want to be able to type a number into this input and have that number go where? I want it to replace this 15. So let's create a variable for it. Var num equals, let's grab the element with the ID of number. And let's test it out. 20. Num.value. Doesn't work. Let me store this outside the function. Okay. Num.value. Doesn't work. And that's because we selected it with jQuery. Therefore, this is actually an array, and we can see it here. This is an array with only one item. So what I need is num at the 0 index dot value. Okay, that gives me what I need. So let's change this variable now that we have identified what we need to be $, hashtag number at the 0 index dot value. And this will happen on click. Then we're simply going to concatenate num at the end of this URL to which we're making our request. So let's say I want 3 GIFs. I get 3 GIFs. Let's say I want, let me reload first. Let's say I want 10 GIFs. I get 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. 10 GIFs. Okay. Now, what if I want to change what we're searching for? I'm going to copy the input and paragraph, and we're going to change this first paragraph. What do you want to see? I'm going to give this input an ID of search queue for search query. And we're going to create an identical variable to num, except this is going to be search query. And what are we going to do with search query? Well, we want to concatenate it in place of Ryan Gosling here. However, is it going to work? If I type in Hugh Jackman, then what's going to get plugged in here is Hugh space Jackman, which is not what we're seeing here with Ryan Gosling. The nature of the URL, it has actually replaced the spaces in my search query with a plus sign. So we're going to need to do that before we insert it into this URL. So let's give that a try. Let me try it in my console first. Var string equals Hugh Jackman. String dot split, wherever there's a space, dot join with a plus. Perfect. Now what happens if string is only one word? Is that going to throw us off at all? Nope, still works. Okay, so let's just add this on here. Split where there's a space, dot join with a plus sign. And then we're going to concatenate it right here in place of Ryan Gosling. Okay, so now let's give it a try. Donkey Kong, 5 GIFs. And we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 Donkey Kong GIFs. Oh god, that is uncomfortable. Whoop. Okay, let's try James Bond, 10. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Okay, so we have adapted the Giphy API for our own purposes. We've incorporated it into our own application, which dynamically requests user data and performs a custom search for a custom number of GIFs based on whatever the user wants to see. And this is just Giphy's regular old search endpoint. They also have a number of others which are worth exploring. Okay, so this is a classic case of using a very well-documented corporate API. It will frequently look like this, and you should absolutely practice it. Last thing I want to say here is we're using a lot of jQuery here, which is not a bad thing. $.get is a really useful method. $.AJAX is a really useful method, but it is not the only way to do this. It is not the only way to do this. Okay, if we wanted to do this without jQuery, and I'm talking about just this part, I'm not going to redefine these variables or this button click event right now. But if we wanted to do this without jQuery, it would look as follows. Var my request equals new XML HTTP request, then my request dot open, and open is going to take first the type of request we're making, get or post, followed by our endpoint, the URL. Same thing. And finally, my request dot onload equals, and this is going to be this guy here. Okay, and the thing that we can do here inside this function is we can actually get all of the, we can actually respond according to the status number which the server sends back to us. This is sounding complicated. It's really not, I promise. So like if my request dot status equals 200. Okay, that's the server status for everything is A-OK. Well, then we're going to do this. If it returns any other status number, well, that means probably something went wrong, and we're going to need an alert. Request failed. Okay, if you're wondering where I got this number from, HTTP server status codes. Let's look at the Wikipedia one. Here we go. 200 is okay. There's not a whole lot that you need to know, but I'm sure we're all familiar with 404, a 404 error when we end up at a page that doesn't exist or something like that. Okay, these are really common, or 500 internal server error when something goes down. These are common server status codes, and 200 is the one for OK. So that's success, essentially. Okay, and once all that is in place, last thing that we need is my request dot send. All right, so this is the vanilla JavaScript equivalent to this. As you can see, jQuery here doesn't save us a whole lot of code. It really doesn't, especially if we're dealing with a lot of different statuses as returned by the server. If we have a lot of different scenarios, jQuery doesn't save us a whole lot of code here. So I'm personally of the opinion that it's not really necessary, although it can make our life easier. And sometimes it will not be appropriate for dealing with APIs. So it's important that you guys know that another method exists without jQuery, and it's not difficult. Okay? But that is a fairly simple, self-explanatory, very nicely documented corporate API. I hope it was helpful.